You know, I'm going to give you a history lesson.
We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country.
Stop laughing! And when I do, start.
Also, y'all did some nasty ass jokes on my ass too.
Funny jokes and unfunny jokes come out of the same birth.
You fucking guys are unbelievable.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you the great Doug Stanhope, one of my favorites, a true living legend, and kind of one of the guys that defines a comic's comic. I think when you hear that phrase, this generation, you kind of think of, I would say, Doug Stanhope, Dave Attell, and Colin Quinn are the three that come to mind. And anytime I've ever heard anyone use that phrase with Colin Quinn, he always says a synonym of that just means an unsuccessful comedian. But but there is something to that because all three of those guys might be certainly three of the most brilliant of their generation, and yet for whatever reason don't get the same just due that a lot of other guys do. So we got a lot of clips to get to for old Dougie Stanhope, so plenty to talk about today. But first, as always, I want to remind everyone, go to blindmike.net. And also, because me and Craig were just talking about an episode that'll be up, I think, before this one, when we do episodes like Eddie Murphy's Raw, really any special like that, or if the guy comes from like SNL or there's a lot of Tonight Show clips or something, anything that's going to be copyrighted, it might result in the videos sucking on YouTube. We apologize. There's nothing we can really do about it, other than post the full videos on Patreon. So if you want to subscribe to the Patreon, I mean, you also get these episodes a week early, and you get bonus episodes. I think we'll be doing, by the way, a Tom Myers bonus. Why You Laughing? You know, we broke down one of the great specials of all time in Eddie Murphy's Raw. So I figured it was only fair to do the white counterpart of Make America Innate Again by Tom Myers. So that'll be a bonus episode on the Patreon as well. So plenty of reasons to go check out the Patreon. But yeah, if the videos have been bothering you on YouTube, Craig's usually pretty good at fighting them tooth and nail, but sometimes it's out of our hands. So
Eddie Murphy's got us. They got us by the balls on that one.
They certainly do. Yeah, I don't blame Eddie. I blame YouTube. But me and Eddie are cool. I feel like he would let me do it. So check out the Patreon if that stuff interests you at all. Also, blindmike.net. Blindmike.net. You can support the show for free, as well as Blind Mike Project and Who Are These Socials. Links for all the podcasts that I do are up at blindmike.net. So support the show for free or support us on Patreon. However you feel fit, we appreciate it. And even though the YouTube overlords have constantly screwed us, subscribe to the YouTube if you wouldn't mind. Get those numbers up, baby. All right, enough of that. Now that we've sold everything, we'll get to a guy that would hate everything about what I just did. And that would be the great Doug Stanhope, who, I mean, if you're talking influence right out of the gate, just me saying that made me think of Bill Hicks talking about the Jay Leno commercials.
Yep.
And the guy you always hear, like a young Bill Hicks, Doug Stanhope gets that label. But also, I think more of Sam Kinison than Bill Hicks. He's, I suppose a little softer spoken, doesn't necessarily scream the way Kinison does. But if you're thinking kind of demeanor and the topics that he gets into, I think a lot of Kinison. But yeah, definitely a Kinison-Hicks hybrid sort of. And if you're talking more current comedians, I think a clear child of Doug Stanhope would be Kyle Kinane.
Definitely.
I think Kinane's also a very underrated guy, much like Stanhope. But I think his general style reminds me a lot of Stanhope. But
the voice and his cadence is almost similar.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing I didn't know at all about Doug Stanhope, you talk about how many funny guys come from the Boston area. I didn't realize he grew up in Worcester. I didn't know he was a Massachusetts guy.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no clue.
Yeah, no, me neither. He bounced around a little bit. Like he'd go back and forth he was in Iowa and Florida for a little while, I think. But I believe most of his formative years were spent here in Massachusetts. So I didn't realize that. But something that makes a lot more sense is that he would get in trouble as a kid for like drawing demonic images and shit like that. And I think he checked out of school by about age 15. So all that adds up. I didn't realize he was from Massachusetts, but everything else about his childhood seemed to make sense to me.
Just him writing pentagrams on his paper and passing it in.
Yeah, right. It's just like Jonah Hill in Superbad, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, he started comedy in 20s. That's when he officially left Massachusetts. Is when he went out to Vegas to start comedy. Is our first clip his television debut?
Yes.
This was weird to look up. And the other guy I had this experience with was Louis C.K., where when you listen to their early work, I remember I was listening to Pandora when Pandora was a little more popular. And I would go to, like, I would just type in, Louis C.K. or Bill Burr or something like that. And, 10 years ago, that's how I discovered a lot of guys like Mulaney, Hannibal Buress, Tom Segura. But one thing I do remember about that is I would go to the Louis C.K. channel and I would hear this clip from like 1990. I'm like, who the fuck is this? And I'm like, it sounds a little like Louis. And sure enough, it doesn't sound like the same guy. He's got a little bit of the voice in there, but he's doing almost like 80s type of material. It's very weird to listen to. And I think you're going to hear a little bit of that in this clip from Doug Stanhope's television debut, which I believe was 1992.
This is great, man. Isn't this great? Geez, my television debut right now. I should be nervous, but just got done working a couple of weeks up there in Montana, and you think normal stage fright's one thing, but playing for bikers and rednecks and you stand up there. I mean, normal stage fright's one thing, but when you get to stand up in front of those guys and me looking like some kind of cellmate, dream date calendar boy. Freezing to death, too. I was up there in February, Butte, Montana. It was 15 degrees below zero inside the hotel. Get out of the shower, step down, my foot froze to the tile. Had to pee on myself to get free.
Sounds like Dennis Miller.
Wow, a little bit. Yeah, that's a good point. I'd love to know. I'd love to ask him. Has booze and cigarettes done that to his voice, or is that like a nervous thing that he's doing there? You know what I mean?
Well, it sounds
his
like
voice sounds so different.
One, he looked like he was 12, and
Oh,
two,
well, let me tell you.
and
Okay,
two, he had the like a more of a Northeast accent. I don't know if it's because you just said he was from Worcester, but that's what it sounded
yeah,
like.
right. Yeah, very weird. And also, I noticed I felt a little bit in there. You pointed out Dennis Miller. That's a good reference, I thought. But when I first heard it, because I've always thought with Stanhope, I'm like, clearly he's a Rodney fan because of the way he dresses. I'm like, on some level, that has to be an homage to Rodney.
Yeah.
But then when I heard that clip, I was like, okay, he definitely is. There's a little Rodney in there for sure.
Oh, yeah. But there's also like some of that, like having to pee on himself. I could see him saying that now.
Yeah, it's the weird thing where it's like his voice, and by that I mean his like comedic voice, not even the tone of voice. It's totally different there, but you can see little glimpses of what he became.
Right.
So what's next?
Joey Diaz.
Yeah, so I'm glad this is next because it goes to what we were talking about, where Joey Diaz talks about meeting Doug Stanhope, and it seems to me like maybe he met the guy in the clip we just played at first.
And then the first two times I saw Stanhope, he was just a mid-local, racy type comic. I thought he was funny, but they were funnier guys. That time I saw him in June of '96. It threw me fucking off. Threw me off that I didn't go back on stage for 2 or 3 fucking days. Like, it made me think about, do I want to keep doing comedy? Or do I want to get a day job? Because I don't know if I can be that good. That being that good is something completely fucking different.
So around that time, I guess he lost to Dane Cook in a comedy competition. which
Makes
is
sense.
wild to think about, but also explains the trajectory of both of their careers from there pretty well.
Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. But yeah, like it's interesting when you hear these guys, and I said the same thing about Louis, where when you listen to their early stuff, it's amazing. I guess basically what I'm saying is the first time you hear a comedian, particularly if they're in their 20s or something, don't write them off because in 20 years they might end up being a legend, you know?
It's a great point because that happens. I mean, there was some people I would see do open mics, and you're like, why the fuck are they even here? And then they're all of a sudden voicing people in like commercials and shit, and you're like, all
Well,
right.
Opie and Anthony would play like Jim Norton would bring in his old tapes. And he'd come out, how's everybody doing? Like he had this weird high-pitched voice. It's interesting when you're listening to these guys that should be a show in itself. The problem is guys from that era, not everyone I assume has tapes of like their very early work. But that would be great if you could listen to like legends to like Chris Rock's first time on set, what he sounded like, you know?
Oh, for sure. I would love
These
that.
unique voices, what they were when they started out. Because as we've talked about many times, most of them are impersonating someone else. Maybe at that time, especially, maybe Stanhope is doing a bit of a Dennis Miller impression in 1992 or Rodney or whatever. And, you know, we talk about like Mitch Hedberg is a great case of that where guys thought like, well, if I just have that cadence, then I'll be funny, you know? And sometimes it's involuntary. You don't really, like, I'm sure Stanhope wouldn't say, I was going out of my way to sound like Dennis Miller. But if he was a fan of his, it can be just involuntary.
Oh yeah. Next is a very popular thing that jealous people do, and that's hating comics.
Yeah, well, this I liked because it brings up another point that Doug made in one of his specials that I find very interesting.
You started at comedy in L.A.?
No, I started in Vegas. Sam Tripoli, I saw him last night or the night before, and I said, we're the only two comedians that I know of that came out of Vegas. Yeah. He said, no, Joe Coy did. I said, like I said, we're the only two comedians. I don't know anything about Joe Coy. I just assume I hate him. you get to an age where you go, I'm sure I'd probably hate that guy.
Yeah. So I feel the same way. I've never seen him do comedy. I've met him twice. Incredibly nice guy. Makes me suspicious immediately.
Well, in the early days, like the first, you know how you learn to hate people when you start out because older comics hate them. So Carrot Top was in my, generation.
That was
the guy to hate.
Yeah.
And it was when Bill Hicks died and he won like the American Comedy Awards over Bill Hicks posthumously. And
furious.
And everyone was furious.
Yeah.
And then you meet him and you go, he's the nicest guy in the world.
Fucking Carrot Top.
Yeah. And then you get to an age, you're like, why don't I hate anyone's comedy?
Yeah.
I don't. I hate the people that laugh at it.
Yeah.
I thought it's such a funny point, and I think it's a code that Doug ended up living by because in one of his specials he talks about he mentions Dane Cook. And I think Doug was kind of one of the guys that was really trashing Dane at the height of his popularity. And then that became very popular for Doug's fans to try and relate to him by trashing Dane Cook. So Doug's basic premise was like, I hope you guys understand that, like, if Dane Cook were here in this room with all these people that love me and are here to see me, if Dane Cook were here, he'd be the only one I want to talk to because he's the only one I can relate to in any way. We're both comedians. At least we have that. You people I have nothing in common with. So, I think that's one thing he's great at is where he can really like viscerally hate something. And then I'll also have the perspective to be like, well, but why do I? I think that's the type of perspective that Doug has where he can be very funny and very brash and, polarizing, but also have the perspective on his own point to be like, well, why do I even really feel this way?
His Joe Coy line was hilarious.
I just imagine I'd hate him.
Like I said, 2 comics out of Vegas.
Yeah, right.
But next, we have him talking about his Mitzi audition.
Yeah, so this is also interesting because I've heard Doug himself tell two different versions of this, which might just be the result of drinking the amount that he does. But this is one version of his Mitzi audition.
I was an improv guy the bar there was the fucking great bar to hang out in. That's why I was never a big comedy store guy.
because they had the front bar.
Yeah, front bar. You didn't have to listen to comedy, which is the best part of it.
Right.
So I'd done a set and then sitting at the bar and this angry but hot waitress.
Usually coincides.
She came out just loudly complaining about how hackneyed the fucking comics are. And they all talk about and I'm watching fucking Flight 800 footage on the news. And I just had some retort. She goes, yeah, well, make that funny. And I went home with a mission.
Yeah.
And I wrote this fucking bit about like the medical examiner. They were getting so much shit, like the medical examiner. And it's been 3 days press conferences and they still can't identify my son's body. I'm like, this guy's in fucking wherever Long Island, some shit town, Long Island. And like he's as busy as the Maytag repairman, and now he's got fucking garbage barges of body parts he's trying to put together with like Mr. Potato Heads or something like that.
Solid.
Like, does this look like your boy's spleen to you? You want to help me out here?
Whose spleen is this?
Anyone recognize it? That's solid. Yeah, that's a solid bit.
It was to the point.
So you can make it funny to showcase for Mitzi.
Yeah,
that's fucking great. Was it brand new?
Yeah, it was.
Wow, that's ballsy.
We don't have a recent disasters comic yet. Now.
So there's a few things that I found interesting about that clip. One was that I've also heard him tell the story that Mitzi didn't pass him at the Comedy Store. That it wasn't until someone else was in charge, I think maybe Adam Egan, I'm not sure, where he got passed. But the kind of interaction that he describes there is that, and maybe this is part of the reason I thought of Sam Kinison. Maybe I'd heard this somewhere before. But when the first time I guess he auditioned for her, she just said, he's too much like Sam. And just that was it. And so it's like we talked about this in the Mitzi Shore episode, but it's hilarious how she would just decide. I think he also taught, I think it was on this Comedy Store podcast that he was telling the story of who am I thinking of? Damn. I'm trying to think. It was someone that's somewhat ethnically ambiguous. And basically she's like, we have too many white guys right now. And it was Bob Kelly. And he goes, well, the joke I told is that a lot of people think I'm Puerto Rican. And she's like, well, we have too many Puerto Ricans, too. So Mitzi was always very funny and where her line was, what her standards were. But the other thing that clip made me think of is, I guess after 9/11, he was attacked on stage. So he really lived again by that code where he's like, okay, something wildly horrible and tragic happened. Where's the funny in here? How do I mine for that? What's the angle that I take? And I think another student of Doug's would probably be a guy like Anthony Jeselnik, where that's literally Anthony's whole thing is like whatever the worst thing in the news is. How do I make that funny? And I think Stanhope definitely has a lot of that, as you could hear in that clip. For
sure. All of his specials are so dark.
Yeah, he has an interesting philosophy that you can definitely tell once I heard him say this. I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Where he describes it as, he's like, I have my jokes in the beginning. You talk about this or that, but then there's the one chunk that the special is really about. And that's very true of him. I mean, we'll get to probably my favorite one at the end of the podcast. But that is true if you watch his specials where it's like, yeah, we'll go in and out of different things. But then at the end, you're like, oh, okay, this is why you're here, to tell us this story. Now I get it.
This is what you put your whole year behind.
Yeah.
Next, we have him talking about Girls Gone Wild, I think on Marin.
Yeah. So he talks about a couple of his great opportunities. So yeah, one of them he was involved in Girls Gone Wild. He was involved in the Man Show. He had a prank show in the early 2000s that we'll talk about. So he had all these like weird little opportunities that we'll hear him discuss.
This whole idea of how do you live with yourself with certain things is something I think about, and so one of the reasons why I'm in my garage. I mean, you must think about that. You must have made a choice at some point where you're like, what the fuck can I do that I can live with myself?
But that's the problem, is that I know that I'm that guy and that I have that kind of hate within me.
Yeah.
So anyone who would like know me from the Man Show or Girls Gone Wild infomercials, I would want to kill me.
Then why'd you do it?
Because it seemed funny at the time. I had no idea. I just Girls Gone Wild was just such a goof thing, and we filmed like 9 nights, and I just thought it would be a goofy thing to do because it was pop culture.
Right,
I did
right.
Jerry Springer once, where I was pretending to be a guy that was upset my girlfriend because it was funny.
Right.
I didn't know that they were going to repeat that commercial every 15 minutes for a year and a half on every basic cable channel where everyone came home drunk and just saw me go, show me where babies feed. Like they took one piece of one drunken thing I said sometime at a bar, goofing on stupid drunken sorority whores.
One joke,
and then made it into my inadvertent catchphase, show me where babies feed.
So how long did it take you to erase that?
I think it's pretty much gone.
Good.
He talked about the host, whatever you call him, the main Girls Gone Wild guy, and said he was the biggest piece of shit he's ever met. Like, I mean, I think there's plenty of stories out there about the way he treated the women.
Yeah.
But just in general, I guess he was just like a pompous douchebag. Like that was awful to deal with. And he has some pretty funny stories from that time, the Girls Gone Wild era. But it is, you hear him there where he's just like, yeah, because I thought it was funny. I don't know. That's why I did it. That's the interesting thing about what the internet has done to comedy, where it's like at the time, sure, there was absolutely an argument where like Girls Gone Wild is demeaning to women. That argument was certainly out there. But for the most part, no one was like, oh, Doug Stanhope is essentially a rapist for contributing to that sort of culture. Whereas now things have changed. In many ways for the better and some for the worse. Things have just changed as how we look at the world. So it's weird to have to go back and look at that and be like, how do you explain this? And I think Doug has the perfect perspective on it because he's like, nah, I don't know. I thought it was funny at the time, I guess.
He wants to be like, it's still kind of funny. Do you want to go to his other TV show or the Man Show?
Let's play the other TV show real quick. Just Spy TV.
Yeah.
There's a little clip of that, and we'll talk about that before we get into the Man Show, which I find a little more interesting.
Doug was on his way out of town for a huge meeting when his Nana dropped dead.
When I came back, she was stinking, bugs all over her, starting to get a little maggoty.
Can he convince this group of shuttle drivers to handle a little extra baggage on their way to the airport?
Gonna drop her at the mortuary.
So she's dead right now, man?
Yeah, so I don't know.
Come on, man.
It's a little piece we call Nana Needs a Ride.
First of all, I just love like 90s commercials in general, like teasers for television shows or movies.
It was funny though because he had like a moving blanket with like a wig sticking out the top. It was very funny.
Yeah, so it's weird because Doug kept getting these opportunities where it's like, so he was on that Spy TV. He said they stole basically all of his ideas and just got ratings from them. Like they gave him no credit or anything and just used his ideas. He had his own pilot, I believe, for Fox. It may have gone a couple episodes. I'm not 100% on that, but very short-lived. And it's weird because like Doug keeps getting these opportunities. It's like I get why he's being hired for these things on the surface. It's like I kind of get if you listen to Doug's comedy or have a feel for his persona at all. I get why on the surface you might think like, oh, he should be part of Girls Gone Wild or a prank show or the Man Show or something. It's like, but it means you're not fully paying attention to who he is.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Where it's like, yeah, I can see how you got there, but it doesn't fit really. But Doug basically was saying that he took a lot of these opportunities essentially just to get to a point, like to survive up until a point where comedy could just sustain him. Like, I don't think he had any aspirations of being an actor or, creating a sitcom or anything like that. I think to him, these were all kind of like paychecks that he was taking. The Man Show, however, I think is a little different in the sense that, we did a whole episode about it, but when Kimmel and Carolla left the Man Show, they bring in Rogan and Stanhope. And that's perfect example of what I'm talking about, where it's like, yeah, I guess if you know Rogan on the surface, if you know who he is, he's a bro who also considers himself a bit of an intellectual. He likes fighting and smoking weed and all of that. Stanhope's a drunk. It's like, I get why you think that would work, but these aren't the right guys for it unless you let them completely change what Kimmel and Carolla were doing. Like, it would have to be something totally different because they're totally different guys than those two. So this is him talking a little bit about the process of the Man Show.
Yeah. But I guess the question is, because I think that like we were on similar trajectories at one time, and then when you came out here, I don't know when the first time was, but when did you realize that show business was fucked?
The Man Show. I have no regrets about that because of knowing now how the process works and how we were completely, we had no ability to make that show better, and we really had great ideas.
And what was stopping you?
Into the Man Show. Well, that's not really Man Show. It has to be. So we'd have good ideas that had some social relevance,
right?
Some kind of.
And who are you answering to?
Everybody. That's the thing. It's we'd pitch it around the writer's room, and then Tom Giannis, the head writer, would pitch it to the executive producer, and he'd send it up to the production company, and they'd send it to Comedy Central, and they'd run it past their lawyers and the censors, and then. So you have an idea, and it's 3 days.
Yeah, and so he goes on to tell. It's a long story, so I didn't include all of it. But basically, he and Rogan had an idea, essentially for the sex rights of homeless men. Like they wanted to be champions of sex rights for homeless men. So basically, they were going to do a bit where they round up homeless men and give them a place where like they're able to have sex free of having to do it outdoors in a public space, invading anyone else's space. Seems like kind of a funny bit that they could have pulled off. They wanted to include real homeless men, and they get into a big debate about it with corporate, where corporate talks, the lawyers and everything are saying like, well, what if a lot of these people are drunks. What if we're responsible for enabling their alcoholism or something like that? These weird arguments. And then Stanhope says, and he goes, I swear to God, this was an actual argument. Well, what if one of them has AIDS and has an open cut and gives it to one of the crew members? And Doug was just like, well, then what are we doing? Yeah, I don't know. You know what? I guess I don't know what we would do in that situation.
What if one of them stabs somebody while filming?
I guess, yeah. If we live our lives in fear, I suppose we can't do anything. But yeah, he also has, we played in the Man Show episode that we had Vinny Paulino on for. We played his great stand-up bit talking about the Man Show, where he's like, I know it sucked. and he finds it hilarious, kind of. But yeah, so basically to back to what I was saying, he and Rogan could have made a good show together, and it could have been along the lines of being men, men being men. It just couldn't be, what Kimmel and Carolla were doing. And it's hilarious to me to think in 2023 now, to think that, only 20 years ago, there were executives saying, but does this really live up to the Man Show standard? Like, is this Man Show quality? That's a hilarious premise to me. But yeah, he did. These are the types of opportunities that Doug had to like kind of get his name out there. I remember I knew the name Doug Stanhope, and it's funny because of his association with that show. In my mind, I was like, oh, these are probably two hacks I'll never hear from again as a kid. There's no way I know the name Joe Rogan or Doug Stanhope in 20 years.
Doug's done everything in his power to make that happen, but
yeah, right.
not Rogan. Next, we have him on O&A talking about his clothing.
Oh yeah, so this is a little bit of like I said, I think there's some Rodney influence here, but this is his explanation of why he started dressing like a traveling salesman from 1973.
You're a zany dresser, man. You got a look. Doug Stanhope's got a look.
Tilt on old leisure suit shit.
Yeah, that's like old leisure suit.
I'm old enough now that people don't know if you're kidding. Like,
right.
If I was 25, I remember I used to have a suitcase. I don't know if you remember this, Norton, but I came to New York City one of the first times I came here, and I had an old suitcase like that.
Flowered?
Yellow flowered suitcase. And I go, I'm going to New York City. I'm going to like a handle bag.
Oh, my God.
A Pan Am flight attendant would have.
Walking around New York City.
And I was skipping. Remember, I was going to take this and I'm going to skip through New York City, and I did.
Just looking like a
then
mark.
You look, oh, he's trying.
You were
Now that I'm old. I can wear a fucking 70s suit like this, and people go, I don't think he's fucking around.
It doesn't look bad on you.
It's such a fine line because there are guys that could do that, and whether or not they mean it, you would just be like, "Oh, you're ripping off. You're trying to be Rodney." Yet with Stanhope, it's like you just believe he would dress like that. You know what I mean? It just feels right. There's when it comes to like authenticity, there's such a fine line where even sometimes if you're being authentic, it won't be acceptable to the audience. But like Doug is an example of a guy where everything he does, you truly believe it's how he is. Like he's been very good at whether it's meticulous or not, how purposeful it is, I don't know. But he's been very good at building his brand into exactly what it is, of being a guy who doesn't really give a fuck.
He's the best. It's weird seeing him not in these suits now.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, honestly. Like it feels right. He belongs in those, and it's weird that he didn't wear them early on. Like it's weird that on the Man Show, that's another thing they said, or that Doug said, is that he would listen to things, and this is where it comes to like where it helps to have confidence, but also just experience for a number of years, because he would get notes like, "Hey, you're slouching and you look like you don't want to be here on the Man Show." And he's like, "Yeah, well, that's my thing." But he's like, "Oh, no, they're telling me not to do that, so maybe I shouldn't." Whereas now he'd be like, "Yeah, well, then find someone else. I don't know. That's what I do."
It's because I'm slouching and I don't want to be here.
Yeah, I'm hungover and I'm, I don't want to be here.
Next we have him on Stern talking about Bisbee.
This is like one of the most interesting parts of his character that again fits very well. It's a perfect puzzle, the Doug Stanhope conglomeration of parts, because it does make a lot of sense that he would move to Bisbee, Arizona. And he's been such an advocate of Bisbee that I remember thinking there was a time where obviously I knew he moved there, and then I kind of forgot that that's why I knew it. Mm-hmm. And then at one time I thought like Bisbee was like it was Phoenix and then Bisbee were the two hubs of Arizona.
Yeah. My buddy of mine who I did stand up with here moved out to Phoenix and actually linked up and went to his compound in Bisbee.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets there and basically he's got his house, and then I think there's 2 or 3 like little houses there.
Yeah.
And one of them is like a bar, and he goes in and Doug's in there, and he made him go do stand up in front of him in the house. And it was like 10 people.
It sounds like the trailer park version of the Playboy Mansion or something.
Exactly.
Where you're like, wow, that sounds like a magical time. And it's just some fucking drunk and his mentally ill girlfriend or wife or whatever she is. Bingo.
Yeah. He said he made him laugh. He made him laugh once, so he felt fine, but the rest of it was dog shit. And then later on he asked to use the restroom. And Stanhope brought him out to a fence and just pissed right next to him.
It's got to be such a weird time. Well, when I interviewed Shane Gillis, he was coming off of Ambien. Right. He was at Doug Stanhope's house.
Right. That's right.
And it sounded like just a house for wayward boys. But we'll let's hear him explain it before we get more into it.
I was hearing you. I was just shocked that you guys own a rental apartment.
It's not a rental.
You guys have a rental property.
It's a house that abuts the back of our house that I bought on
You rented it out to friends.
I drunk bought a house.
Right. But the fact that you had enough money to do that is what I'm impressed with.
Well, it's $59,000. You can buy a house in Bisbee.
Wow.
The whole house was, it was
I could go out there and maybe like buy up all of Bisbee.
And
you could be a real estate king.
I shouldn't have been Bisbee,
right, right beside my house. So I just
We have a
cut
secret
a door
in the fence.
Has anyone followed you guys to Bisbee? Any other show businesses?
Yes.
Really?
I didn't even tell Will this.
What?
Yeah, we have a stalker fan that moved in across the street.
And you like
Directly across the street.
Yeah, see, Craig's buddy isn't the only creep that went out there, but
He was invited.
but no, but that's the thing is there's a lot of people I'm sure that have gone out there specifically. He's given out his address on multiple podcasts. Like,
yeah,
you
he
can just go. It's like Disney World for drunks and drug addicts. Where you
Yeah,
can just-
he was approached at a comedy club in Phoenix to come out to Doug's house. He didn't buy the house across the street.
tomato. But yeah, I'm honestly surprised, and maybe it's because Doug it does have like a cult following, but sometimes that's more dangerous, you know.
Oh yeah.
So I am surprised that there hasn't been like an incident. Although, what I'm about to say is in that Stern interview, they were talking about. I guess they let friends of theirs like rent the house, or I don't know if money was exchanged at all, but like Doug and Bingo left for the week, and they gave the house to this couple they were friends with, and I believe the husband, it may have been the wife, but I'm pretty sure it was the husband, killed himself in their house, and Bingo had to come home and like clean up the fucking remains.
Oh my god,
it's bedlam out there. It's wild out in Bisbee.
That's the most Stanhope thing to have happen too.
It's the most Stanhope thing to have happen and be like, it's not as bad as it sounds. That's literally what he told Howard. He's like, no, you're making it sound worse than it is.
I just got a new carpet. Here's him on O&A talking more about Bisbee though.
A little more Bisbee. Yeah. 2005, I believe, is when he moved out there too, which I didn't realize how early it was. Where like, you know, he'd been on the Man Show, but he hadn't really made a name for himself in 2005. He'd made some kind of name for himself. Obviously, he built up a following, but like, I don't know. It wasn't the internet wasn't where it is now, so it takes a lot of balls to be like, I'm just gonna leave. You know, now you have like Nate Bargatze lives in Nashville. You have Rogan and all these guys in Austin. You know, you kind of have people around the country that are able to pull off a comedy career, not being in New York or Los Angeles. 2005, that wasn't really the case. Stanhope was a pioneer for a lot of these guys.
Pick Bisbee. Would you throw a fucking dart at a map? How'd you get Bisbee, Arizona? Who recommended Bisbee?
I found it accidentally just driving back roads, but it's this weird little town, and there's nothing like it.
Sounds weird.
It's like this hippie enclave. It was a mining town where the mine went bust in the 70s, and all the property value just went dirt cheap. So all these artists and freaks just took over the town, and it's the most beautiful town, all built in the mountains. It's not on the way to anything, so no one finds it. It's not like Sedona or something.
It sounds like the type of
fucking Beverly Hills jack off, you know, jumps in and makes it overpriced.
It is, and it feels like after I think the pandemic and everything, I feel like people have a lot more of that mindset where it's like, just bring me to, you know, North Carolina or Montana or something like that. But back then, no one was thinking like that. Like, that's a ballsy move for Stanhope to make. Now, the argument could be that he didn't even really give a fuck about his career. He just bought a house for $59,000. He could drink himself to death if he wanted to in Bisbee, Arizona. But it is still, I think, ballsy for a guy to make that move. And then it honestly became even, you know, more impressive once like podcasting became such a thing. Stanhope started his podcast, I think, in 2013, 10 years ago. But, you know, like not long after that is when, particularly in Los Angeles, a lot of these guys got bigger just from being on each other's podcast. Rogan obviously being, you know, the most popular example, but you look at all these, you know, Andrew Santino and Bobby Lee and Segura and Kreischer and all these guys. that got massive followings, honestly, more for their podcasts than for their stand-up. So when that became such a promotional tool for Stanhope to still be in Arizona is a pretty gutsy move. I do also think it hinders his career in a way because, like with, I mentioned Colin Quinn and Dave Attell, at least they're around and they'll pop into, Jim and Sam, or they'll do like We Might Be Drunk or one of those New York podcasts, Legion of Skanks, they'll pop into whatever. Stanhope's not around at all, so you almost forget about him at times, which is, it's criminal if you're a comedy fan, but I'm guilty of it too, where I'm like, oh yeah, fucking Stanhope, I forgot about him.
Oh yeah, where's he been? Oh yeah, Bisbee. Wow,
Bisbee, Arizona.
Must be overpopulated now though.
So many people moved out to Bisbee to follow Stanhope.
Yeah, he would. There's been a couple times he would throw like a Super Bowl party and put his address out there and be like, whoever feels like coming.
Yeah, it became like the spot. He would talk about like watching football and like just these Bisbee, the dregs of Bisbee would drag themselves. I'm saying this, I'm sure guys I would much rather hang out with than anyone else, any classier person.
He would have people over for the game, right? So all these randos would show up, and Sal Vulcano would be at his house, and he'd be like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, that's the weird thing, is you would mix with these legitimately like famous people, which we'll get into. But also, sad note to that, recently is they had a fire at his house in Bisbee.
Yes.
And Stanhope, this is pretty recently. And I know when the last time he was on Rogan was about a year ago, and he said he hadn't like left his house not left his house, but like left Bisbee in over a year at that time.
Yep.
And Stanhope's a guy, like, thank God he didn't. But would it shock you if you found out, like, oh yeah, Doug's house caught on fire and he died? It's like, oh, that seems about right.
Yeah, he thought he could put the fire out by jumping on it. Something like that. Next we have him on Louis.
So this is, and the reason I wanted to include this is because he also had an independent film come out recently. I, for the life of me, don't know how to access it. And I think even on their, like on the movie's Twitter page, I think the bio is basically like, you can't watch it yet. So it's very Stanhope. But the only reason I know about it is I saw him at some independent film award winning Best Actor. And it turns out it sounds like a very similar role to this role that he had on Louis, where he plays, it was a bit of a stretch. He's playing a guy that came up in comedy around the same time as Louis and wants to kill himself. So I don't know how he tapped into that sort of voice, but he was able to do it quite well.
Yeah, Doug, where did you go to get to this point?
I saw the premiere of 4th of July, Joe List and Louis C.K.'s movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Ron Bennington interviewed the cast. And he asked Nick DiPaolo about his character, because Nick was very good in the movie. And he said that he plays Joe's angry, racist, drunk uncle. So I've only been studying the role for about 60 years.
Yeah, I'm listening. Go ahead.
Look, man, I'm cashing in. I'm done. I'm 40 shit years old. I got nothing. I got nobody. I don't want anything. I don't want anybody. And that's the worst part. When the want goes, that's bad. I mean, like, suffering is one thing, or the not having is one thing. But when you just don't care anymore, I've gone soft in the last 3 pussies I've been in. You get to a point where maybe it's time to just put a period at the end of my whatever this was.
So you're going to quit comedy?
How dense are you? Comedy? Who gives a shit about comedy, man?
Well, what are you talking about?
My life. I'm going to end it.
It's such a great line, too, for Louis to throw in there, because it kind of shows how self-involved a lot of comedians can be, where this guy's pouring his heart out to you, and you're like, "So you're gonna quit comedy?" And it's like, "How did you get that from this?" But it's such a great episode of Louis, and it's one of those. And Louis had this with a few guys where like he would put a lot of comics in his stuff because he would he would kind of write the part and just be like, "Oh, Stanhope's perfect for this." He did it for Jim Florentine, I know, is one. Todd Barry has a great episode where he's like, "Oh, these guys, like, I would kind of want to showcase these guys." And that episode always made me feel like, all right, I know that Stanhope's brand is not giving a fuck and not wanting to do anything, but I do kind of wish he acted more because he's a great actor.
Yeah, I always like the one when he had Dane Cook on. They kind of had it out, like they're.
I think we played that in the Dane Cook episode. Yeah, that was a great scene because it was very real. Like you could tell. I mean, I think both guys said this. Like they didn't actually have the conversation, but that's what the conversation would have been had they had it.
Yeah, I saw Dane Cook said somewhere that they didn't have the conversation, and what they saw, Louis wrote both sets of lines,
which is great. That's the brilliant perspective of, not to go on a Louis tangent, but like to have that argument with yourself and accurately portray the other guy's the side of things is, I think, what makes him a genius.
Yeah, especially too because Dane could just be like, "Oh, so you do understand where I'm coming from?"
right.
There's nothing else to really talk about then. Next, we have him on the bonfire.
Okay, so this I included because I wanted to portray to all of you what Doug would do, because, like I said, he kind of lived in Bisbee through a time where it was very important to get on a lot of these podcasts and radio shows and promote your stuff when you had something going on. So what Doug would do, I'm specifically thinking of one tour, I believe in 2015, where he went to New York to promote whatever he was doing. And he would start on Jim and Sam or whatever, Opie and Jim, whatever the morning show was at that time. And that's, let's say he comes in at like 8 o'clock in the morning. Let's pretend. It could have been 7. I'm not sure. And he would start drinking. And then he would do these marathon podcasts where he would line up shows throughout the day. And he would do, Kumia's show. And he would go on Legion of Skanks. And he would go on The Bonfire. He would go on Nick DiPaolo, which he has a very funny line about that I'll mention after this. But he would do all these shows, and you would watch him at that time. Like if you lined up the podcasts and radio shows correctly, you would hear him get progressively more shit-faced throughout the day. So, like, we've heard enough clips. We know what Doug sounds like sober, obviously. You can tell he's a little inebriated in this one. What he's trying to do is make a point. This might actually be 2017 because it's right around the Me Too movement and everything. So what he's trying to do is present an argument that, like, yeah, everyone's had regrettable sex. However, Yamaneika Saunders is in, who's a comedian from a younger generation than Doug. And she's a woman of color who's a little overweight. And this is how Doug presents the argument that he's trying to make to her.
Have you ever fucked a guy that he regretted it the next day?
Interesting.
No.
Already, she's offended.
You're not aware.
You think it's never happened?
Oh my god! Oh, is this what this is about? Me having some nigga in a stale suit try to roast me on this fucking show? Is he kidding me?
No, I'm trying to.
No, you think I don't understand that? No, I didn't understand that whack ass joke you just did.
Hold on, pause a second. I'm sorry.
Don't ever fucking try to play me like that. Every dude that fucks me wants to fuck me. Now, what woman has fucked you and regretted it? Probably a million.
I couldn't hear you.
Just go back a little bit, just because I wanted to point out. You hear Soder go, no, that's not what he. Come on, just trying to keep this thing on the rails. You can tell Soder does not want this confrontation. Jay doesn't want it at all, and they're like, "Oh no, what you heard him just do? That's definitely not what he's doing. No, you misunderstood, Yamaneika." But it's true, like that wasn't what he was doing, but he's so shit-faced that he can't get it across.
Right.
Is this what this is about? Me having some nigga in a stale suit try to roast me on this fucking show? Is he kidding me?
No, I'm trying to.
No, you
start
think
a
I don't understand that?
dialogue.
No,
I'm
that
trying to talk
I didn't
about-
understand that whack ass joke you just did just
Black
now.
Lou hyped up.
Don't ever fucking try to play me like that. Every dude that fucks me wants to fuck me. Now, what woman has fucked you and regretted it? Probably a million. Let's start with Bingo.
Becky, good timing.
And that was her name, ho.
But
I'm just telling you, I'm not in the mood for this bullshit today. So if this is what he's on, I'll leave. I'm a respectable comic also. I'm not putting no jingle jangle. I came in here with some black shit when I came in here. He's hot up and hot and all this other dumb shit. I'm telling you, I don't give a fuck about a Doug or whatever the fuck his name is. I'm telling you right now.
I thought we were all going to
I'm telling
Chachi
you,
together.
so whatever,
I'm smiling. Don't worry.
Good, you should. But whatever insults you trying to pull out, you put it on these two because they're the hosts here. Don't put it on me. You don't know me like that.
I'm telling you.
No, he wasn't trying to bridge it gap. I understand where the fuck he was going with that joke.
Every human being alive.
Is there any man that ever regretted fucking me? Then I'm not being honest with my. Get the fuck out of here, nigga. You don't know me like that.
God, she's a barrel of laughs.
It's weird. I do get. She like just walked in. So I do get why she's like, what the fuck is he trying to do? And he's a little defensive. But yeah, she takes it in a weird way where it's like, I mean, Doug's first of all, a very well-respected comic. It's weird to pretend you don't know him.
Yeah,
but
don't do that.
It was a very weird interaction. But what I think is hilarious about it is like, if you listen to the full context, you understand what Doug's trying to do. And then right after that, you can tell he feels bad because he goes, it was DePaulo had a serious show at the time. And it came on right after the bonfire. And he goes, you know, the shame of this is I have to go do a real racists podcast after this. but yeah, the only reason I wanted to play it's not a seminal moment in Doug's career or anything, but I think it was funny that he would do these marathon shows where if you listen to all of them, you'd be like, boy, I remember him making that point a lot more coherently 6 hours ago. It's just very funny, but
she stinks.
She's all right. It's not certainly not her best moment. I don't mind Yamanika, but yeah, that's not a great moment of hers.
Next, we have unique podcast interview.
Oh, so now I wanted to mention more his podcast because, again, I think his podcast is very underrated because it's not in that same scene. Oh, part of it is I don't think he puts the, when I say effort, I kind of put this in quotes, where the reason for a lot of the success of guys like Schultz and Santino and these guys is they know how to work the algorithm. They know what works on YouTube, what you have to put in the captions, what you have to have for thumbnails, all that. Stanhope doesn't give a fuck about that, obviously. So that's part of the reason his podcast isn't as popular. But I find it so interesting, like what he does in some of these episodes. For example, there's an episode where he describes he got a letter from a fan who was going to kill themselves, and the lengths that he goes to try and make sure this person is all right is a wild story. And there's a lot of things like that, based on a lot of the stuff that Doug talks about. I think he attracts an audience that is definitely more open about certain mental illness and things. Like I mentioned, Bingo also was is his wife. Oh, I wanted to go back to this too before I forget. Sex got brought up a couple times. I think in that Louis scene, he says, I went soft in the last 3 pussies I've been in. He talks on Stern about him and Bingo are essentially in like a platonic relationship. They've been together for 20 years. And Stern was like, well, how often do you have sex? He goes, virtually never. And so they have an interesting relationship. And she was in a coma for months.
Forever, it seemed like.
For a while. And he told, I probably should have included it, but he told a hilarious story of, I'm thinking of the mother who we'll get to, so I won't spoil it. But yeah, he said he wanted to, with Bingo, like take pictures of him getting married to Bingo's sister. And when she woke up, tell her that she's been in a coma for 25 years or something. So he covers a lot of dark shit like this, like, is my overall point. This is probably the darkest, where he has an interesting interview subject. So on this particular episode of the podcast, he has Shane Gillis on for the first half. And this was right after, obviously, Shane got fired from Saturday Night Live. The episode is entitled, "So You Wanted to Be on SNL." And that's why it took me a little while to find, because I was like, well, that can't be the right episode. Turns out his second guest on this episode also had dreams of being on Saturday Night Live, and took a, some would argue this guy is even more controversial than Shane Gillis.
Relationship with your mother at that time?
It was a great relationship. She had supported me through thick and thin, through my divorce, through some tough times in my life. She supported me in my comedy. She was one of the very first people to show up to my first show at the local club. And there were a lot of things that she did for me that I'll never be able to thank her for, because I ended up murdering her. And that's not something that I take very lightly.
Which obviously is that's as serious a break as you can have.
Yes.
Do you remember what your thinking was at the time?
I don't, because what happens is you kind of block out. What happened was the day of the event, I was watching football, and then the delusion started. And I thought that she was hurting other members of my family. And it got to be so real that I decided that something had to be done about it. And that's when I hurt my mother.
So this guy, there's video of him sitting in the front row of Legion of Skanks shows.
I was gonna say
he was a genuine comedy fan. And then all of a sudden, one day he wasn't there anymore, and they're like, "Whatever happened to that guy?" And they found out he murdered his mother.
And he's out. He's out from insanity, I believe.
It's fucking crazy, and it's such a interesting podcast to listen to, because you hear Doug there, like, a guy from 60 Minutes talking to Charles Manson, saying, "Boy, that's a pretty serious break." But but it's fascinating because there's, it's weird to say because it involves murder, but like, there's no judgment really. Doug's just getting to the bottom of this guy's mental illness, and he very matter-of-factly talks about it, and it is fascinating. And I think those are the type of characters Doug takes an interest in. And the reason I think he's great at it is because there isn't judgment. Like, obviously, I don't think he thinks it's a good thing that man murdered his mother.
Right.
I think he puts that in the positive column.
Yeah,
but
maybe he does.
Who knows? Maybe he does. But what's interesting about Doug, and why I think he's such a brilliant guy, is because he doesn't feel the impulse to have the reaction that we all feel like we have to have. Where if you're talking to that guy and he just casually says there, like, "I murdered my mother," we'd have to go, "My word, my God!" We have to, show how offended we are at that. Whereas Doug's like, "All right, interesting. Let me ask you about that." I think that's such an interesting mentality to have with something like that.
Right. And didn't he actually get pissed at the Legion of Skanks for a bit? The way they treated this guy? Was it someone, or was it someone else?
Well, I don't know that. That might, honestly, that whole story might be worth looking into for a bonus episode at some point. I'll jot that down.
I thought there was something that happened, like the Legion of Skanks guys did something and it pissed him or somebody else off in regards to that.
I'd have to look into it. But it's the reason I brought up SNL is because that guy believed, and he says to this day, I have no idea if this is true or not, but I believe I had an interaction with Colin Jost where he told me to come in and audition. And then basically he was having these like delusions that he was interacting with Lorne Michaels and all this crazy stuff. And so he got arrested for basically charging 30 Rock, essentially.
Yeah, that guy would be a good bonus episode.
Yeah, that's you know what? Shame on me for not even thinking of it, but I'll jot that down. That's a good one.
Next we have him on with Chrissy Mayer.
What's he talking about here?
Johnny Depp.
Oh, well, this is, I mentioned before, you mentioned Sal Vulcano.
Mm-hmm.
At least Sal's a comedian.
Right.
Imagine there's just like three drunks on the couch one day at Stanhope's house, ready for football, and they look up and Johnny Depp is there which is apparently very possible.
Well, he'll also be drunk, so it'll be 4 drunks.
Yes, yeah.
Oh yeah, you mentioned Johnny Depp before. I was Googling you. How did you guys become friends?
He his agent sent an email saying one of our clients wants to reach out to it was, I don't know, CAA or whoever it was, one of those fucking William Morris or some is trying to reach out to Doug Stanhope. How would we go about this? And then my manager contacted them. It's right before a show in Canada I was about to do. He's like, well, evidently Johnny Depp wants to talk to you. I'm like, it was almost like it was right after a special had come out where I'd like have to do all new material that I've like really focused on. And I'm like, well, for what? He's like, well, that's all the information I have. And then it was 9 days of a Canadian tour. Every day I'm just staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring, taking any kind of spam call. Does Johnny Depp
Retail marketer.
Yeah, it was fucking, no, not today, Meatwig. Sorry, my cat's going to be yowling in the background.
Aw.
So yeah, then he called. He was just a fan and thought maybe we should do a project or something. And we flew me to London, and then we just drank for our whole friendship.
Yeah, so I don't know if the project, I've heard him mention this a couple times, that there was a project Johnny wanted to work with him on, and the end result of that was him drinking together. So I don't know if Johnny Depp just wanted a friend and liked Doug Stanhope's comedy. I'd like to drink with you. So, so I don't know what the project would have been ultimately. I think those two in some sort of buddy comedy could have worked. Who knows?
That would have been great.
But it's a wild relationship that led to Doug Stanhope getting sued by Amber Heard because he called, what was it exactly? He said she was, did he say she was extorting him, or the lawsuit was frivolous or something like that? But he made some accusations about Amber Heard, and she, who is always of sound mind, felt them to be untrue, and sued Doug Stanhope. And then I believe when things really started to ramp up with her versus Johnny, the Stanhope stuff felt, sort of inconsequential. So that was dropped. But it's wild that Doug Stanhope, all the way from Bisbee, Arizona, got wrapped into, the trial this last decade. It's crazy.
She dropped the defamation suit.
That's right. That's what I was looking for. Yeah.
And she claimed that she filed defamation suit because Stanhope in an article said that she blackmailed Depp, which is exactly what.
Right. Yes, blackmail. Yeah. I knew there were some legal terms. I couldn't get there on my own.
Turns out Doug just said exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think she would take shits in his bed. It's funny. There was a time where we'd all be like, "That's ridiculous, Doug."
Right.
But yeah, Doug was right at the center of that. It's a very weird. I mean, I guess now that we know a little more about Johnny Depp from that trial, it kind of makes perfect sense that he'd be hanging out with Doug Stanhope.
Oh, 1,000%.
But, Pirates of the Caribbean, Johnny Depp, you're like, oh, that's pretty weird. I don't see them hanging together. I'm imagining Doug having to sit there while Johnny decides which bracelets to put on and all the scarves.
I think he's hanging out more with Secret Window, Johnny Depp.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Next, we have him doing a bit, and it's entitled Cowards.
Oh, so we're into, I think everything left is his stand-up pretty much, right?
Yeah, except for the shoehorning of Norm.
Yes, well, of course. But there's a main bit that I want to get to that I find the most interesting and the probably the most personal bit I've ever heard anyone do in comedy. Definitely. Just because there's so many legal implications tied to it.
Yes, there is.
But I just wanted to mix in a couple other of his stand-up bits that, like I said, I think is so underrated, even though he has hours of material out there. Just search YouTube on YouTube Doug Stanhope, and a bunch of hours will, I think at least 7 that I saw, hours of material will pop up. But this is a funny bit that he has on cowardice.
Coward is the most misused word in this society. It's like a big bailout word where you got nothing else to. John Walsh, America's Most Wanted, right? Every week, let's call this 800 number right now and get this cowardly murderer off the streets once and for all. And you go, coward? Come on, there's words that would fit. Right? Sociopath, whack job, dick. You just want to be simple, dick. There you go. But coward, the guy's driving around with body parts in his car, for God's sakes. I get clammy palms just driving around with expired tags. Chunks of a little kid in my trunk. I'm not condoning the behavior. I'm just saying it's a little nervy. A little ice in the veins for that project.
So, honestly, I highly recommend if Doug is in your town, go catch his stand-up because I think he's constantly turning out new material. He constantly has new stuff. And I saw him in Key West, actually. I was just on vacation there last year and saw it lined up with his date there. He played just a 100-seat room, which is probably the best type of place to see him. And, you know, he drinks and just goes off for like an hour and a half. He does usually. I think particularly that night, he wasn't doing a late show. He was just doing the one show. So he's like, you know, listen, if you ever want to get up and leave, feel free, but I'm going to be up here for a while. And it's honestly just an awesome experience that he hands out. I think I don't know how new this is that he's been doing, but he was doing it when I saw him. Every hotel room that he goes into that still has a Bible, he steals it. And then at his shows, he autographs them and sells them himself. He's making money off stolen Bibles, which I wanted to get one and I didn't for some reason. I think it was like $100 and I was like, that's too much. But in hindsight, I'm like, why didn't I just do it? Because it's a bizarre thing to have a Doug Stanhope signed Bible.
Well, I was going to say, like, if, you ever got like, what's like the weirdest thing you have? That would have been your answer.
Yeah, I had Doug Stanhope signed Bible. Why is that weird?
Is that uncommon? But next we have a bit on poverty.
Okay, yeah, this is that. So, like I said, he tackles basically every social issue, which is why I kind of wish he was more prevalent. Because we've talked about this before, like when we talked about Bill Hicks. We said, who's the guy of this generation? And I mean, Doug Stanhope's a little older, so it's not like I'm talking about an up-and-coming guy here. But I think he's certainly that voice. And, at times I wish it was a little louder. Now, it's also weird for me to wish that when Doug is perfectly capable of just doing it and doesn't feel like it. He'd rather have a quiet life in Bisbee, which is very respectable. But yeah, his takes on things honestly I feel like Carlin's the wrong example. The example I always want to go to is Carlin. Hicks is probably a better example because it's stuff you might not agree with, and it might not hold up in 20 years. You know, the way people tweet out like Carlin clips now and are like, see, he knew. Hicks was different in the sense that like he might have been wrong about a lot of stuff. He was right about a lot of stuff as well, but there's stuff he's wrong about, but it was uniquely him. And I think that's exactly what Stanhope's voice is also.
Definitely.
The statistic is roughly 1 out of 6 Americans live below the poverty line, which I know that's you, my fan base generally. Probably 4 out of 6 of my fan base below the poverty line. My friends in Bisbee, 5 out of 6 easily, plus a fraction. But it's not poverty. It's people down here work as little as possible, which is admirable. It's just enough to get by. That's below the poverty line, but it's just kind of broke is what it is. It's not poverty. It's insulting to impoverished countries to say 1 out of 6 people live in poverty. That's American standards of poverty, where you still have a flip phone and you're embarrassed to break it out in front of chicks. That kind of Disgraceful poverty. You have to watch Walking Dead on BitTorrent. Oh my God. I have to live. Gonna roll up the passenger side window with pliers because the handle fell off in your Dodge Neon. You don't have power windows? Wow, you're well below the poverty.
That's funny.
Oh shit, that was the end. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it's so funny, and that's what I'm talking about, like the social commentary that he brings. Because particularly with comedians that gain a certain level of success, like I just saw a clip on Instagram where it was very funny because Chris DiStefano and Salva Cano do a podcast together, and DiStefano was saying, he's like, I'm actually trying to practice poverty now. But what I mean by that is like do things that I have the money to not do, but like I want to take the train and I want to fly coach and stuff like that. So I'm still like relatable. And he's talking about this on a podcast. And in the clip, you see in the background, Joe DeRosa emerges in that moment and they play like the Undertaker music. And he walks in and he goes, did I just hear you describing poverty as the way that I live every day? And it was a very funny clip, but it reminded me of that bit because it is like, I think that's the type of perspective that Stanhope brings is like, there's no bullshit. And the guy's a legend, but he's never lost that ability to, relate to the common man because he's literally lived like a common man for many years now.
He's the best.
So are we in the
Yep.
The doozy now?
We're at the doozy. We're at the grand finale.
This is my I can't even say it's like my favorite. I don't know if it makes me laugh the hardest, but I find it, like I said, to be the most personal. So we have a couple clips. It's a much longer 10 or 15 minute chunk. If you want to go find it on YouTube yourselves. But this is a bit, he put this in his book. And then one of his specials. By the way, speaking of Doug's specials, it's another kind of misfortune of his career, I guess, is that like I think it might be this particular special. I don't know if that lines up right time wise, but he had a special come out around like 2017, and if you listen to podcasts back then, you would hear a lot of comedians promote things they were doing on CISO, which was NBC's answer to Hulu and Netflix at the time. Now, of course, they have Peacock, which I think does much better, but no one was subscribing to this CISO. And if it wasn't for comedians promoting their projects on CISO, no one ever would have even heard of it. And it failed. And Doug put a special on there that was great. And luckily now he's released it on YouTube, so you can go watch it. But it's like all these little things where it's like, damn, if that was on Netflix instead of CISO, at that time, it could have really popped him,
Yeah, and I've always liked Doug Stanhope, but he's never been like top of my.
Oh no,
list. No, I think
he's one of the greatest ever, and then seeing him live kind of cemented that for me.
Yeah,
that was a great experience.
I've never seen him live, but I think I've said that before. I just want to get ahead of it before people think I'm flip flopping.
Yeah, well, you're one of his peers. You and your buddy, stalk his home and drink with him. So I understand you not getting the appeal.
He was invited, and he had to stand up in the most awkward situation ever. I don't feel bad.
I like that stand up just says dance for me. Makes people do stand up.
It's exactly what he called me. He goes, dude, he made me do stand up in front of him and 6 other people.
Amuse me.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear this bit about his mother kind of coming to grips with an illness she was dealing with.
My mother killed herself in 2008. Don't worry, this is a fun story. It was the best death to ever be part of. She was dying of emphysema at 63. Her brain was still with it, but she was drowning in her own fluids. She's being permanently waterboarded by 45 years of cool miles. She can't take it anymore. We knew it was going to happen when she made the call. You can't do it. I'm like, all right, Ma, we'll do what we can. All right, Ma's gonna kill herself. I don't know what to do. Like that's okay. We know it's gonna happen, but when you say we're gonna do it, I'm not gonna go buy you a fucking shotgun. Like, oh, have fun, Ma. So I don't know what to do. I don't kill people. It's not something like I fantasize about it. If my mother were Nancy Grace, I'd have been all over it. Like I have plans. My mother's a great person. So I'm like, how do we do this right?
So that's very funny. But in the Marin interview that we played a little bit of earlier, there was genuinely a time where, like, so Marin asked him about, he's like, brought up something about his mother. And Marin asked him like a follow-up. And Doug goes, I can't really talk about it. I'll tell you after. So there legitimately was a time where Stanhope could not tell this story because he would have gone to prison.
Right.
And so that's why I think it's so, like, legitimately, there are comedians where if this happened to them, they never would have talked about it publicly, whether it be on a stage or podcast or interview or anything. And I wouldn't blame them for that. It's an extremely personal thing to have to go through. So for him to not only tell the story, but make it hilarious, I think it perfectly speaks to who he is. Like the only guy, or, you know, one of maybe the three only guys you'd be disappointed in if you found out this happened to them and they didn't talk about it on stage. Doug Stanhope would be one of the very few guys that's the case, where you're like, come on, Doug, you got to make that funny.
Meanwhile, everyone else, you're like, why would you talk about that?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. If, you know, Brian Regan was talking about this, you'd be like, good Lord. This is a departure.
Stanhope would be like, you kept that from us? You piece of shit.
How dare you?
Right,
let's hear a little more.
Yep.
We watched Bad Santa, and she's trying to choke down these pills. She had a very hard time taking pills, so she just gagging and just getting them down. So I'm keeping a vague count. When she got around 30, little over, I'm like, Ma, that's good. You don't need to do any more. You're fine. And she said, I don't want to take any chances. She's so scared of fucking up. She took all 90. No, we're sitting there in horror going, you're wasting. Ma, they said 30 of those would kill any human being alive. You could leave 60 of them for me and Bingo as our only inheritance, other than the last 17-year-old blind cat you have, Georgia. Yeah, you're going to have 60 morphines to have spontaneous memorials for Mother every here and again. Remember, Mom? Papa morphine. Woo! What a great lady. What a crazy old bitch. No, hoarder till the end, all fucking 90.
It's very funny. He talks about how she didn't want to interrupt football, so she did it on a Saturday instead of a Sunday. Again, it's like the darkest story ever if you look at it on the surface, but he's able to make it hilarious to the point where you're almost like rooting for her to die as you listen to this story. You're like, hey, good for her, you know?
Right. It's one of those too that, like, if you saw this typed out, you'd be like, God, Doug's a monster.
Well, it's in his book, so I haven't read it, but maybe it does make it funny. I've only listened, so I get the full feel. But
meaning, like, if you saw typed out that his mother OD'd, but she didn't leave him any of the pills, you're like,
right.
You asshole.
What a piece of shit. Well, there's a little more that might make you say that. I think in the closing bit here.
The afterlife is this. If there were no afterlife, how could my mother have bought me and my friends so many nice things from the Sky Mall catalog on her credit card 4 days after she passed from this earth? Answer me that, Your Honor. Answer me that.
Sky Mall.
It's pretty ballsy because I know he waited till the statute of limitations was up, but it's definitely a lot of crimes he's admitting to here.
Oh yeah.
So
I thought murder was there's no statute on murder.
Well, so that wouldn't be murder if she's taking the pills, but I'm sure he's consulted many lawyers on this.
Oh, it's probably like aiding and embedded or whatever the fuck.
Well, my guess would also be that there's an element of he can tell this story, on stage, and it could fall under, parody law or
Right.
some form of performance.
Yeah.
That's my assumption. I certainly don't know enough about the law to actually answer that, but it is a wild story. He says my favorite, much like this is what I was thinking of when I mentioned the bingo wedding pictures, is that he said, her last words were she spilled something on herself, like a drink or whatever. And they tried like telling her, and she goes, "There's time to be a lady and there's time to be a pig." And he said that her a fault of hers is that when she got a laugh, she would really hammer it home. And he said that she would go to like kind of double down on that joke, and he goes, "No, those are perfect last words, you bitch. Shut up." And then he's so later she kind of starts drifting away. The morphine is really kicking in, and he says, who knows if this is true, but he claims that they would do things to fuck with her as she was drifting away, like yell, "Wait, Ma, they found a cure!" Which I think is just the idea of it is fucking hysterical. I hope it happened, but even if it didn't,
It's also very mean. What if she was like, really?
they found a cure. So yeah, I don't know. I think I know he doesn't live up to Craig's standard. I know Craig's more of a Dane Cook, Chris D'Elia guy, but I think he's a true genius. I think he's a legend. I think he's one of the greats. If you guys aren't familiar with him, let me know. But if you are familiar with him, let me know if I did him justice. One last thing before we go, as Craig mentioned earlier, of course, we haven't done this in a while. We got to shoehorn in Norm Macdonald when we can. And I thought this was a pretty funny story. This is he was talking to Artie Lang about this. I guess Doug and Norm didn't necessarily know each other that well. But this is Doug's portrayal of one interaction they had.
You know Norm?
Sure, sure. One of my best friends.
Hey, Norm. Fuck you.
What are you talking about?
Norm
What happened?
baited me on Twitter. He goes, I'm going to one day tell you the story of how Doug Stanhope changed my comedy career.
Really?
For good, I hope.
Very.
Never followed up. Like all
like
my
Johnny Depp
Twitter
back on it.
followers for like a year now.
And you have no idea what he was talking about.
One day I'm going to tell this story.
Right.
He never told the fucking story.
And do you know him?
No, I love it. He is on Stern.
Right.
What Charles Grodin was on Letterman.
Yeah, he's
just
really
anytime
good.
he's on.
He's so fast too. Like hanging.
He's so good.
And this is when you can tell by the way they're talking. This is when Norm was still alive. So it's even a more hilarious bit now that Norm croaked without ever telling Doug what the fuck he meant by that.
I would have sent him as if I was Normie, like you knew you were going that weekend.
Yeah.
I would send out messages like that about a ton of people. Just be like, this person changed my life. Oh, really? And then die.
If I'm Doug, there's a certain point where I stop, and every day I'm messaging him like, "What did you mean? What did I do?
Please tell
me I'm a good boy."
It was tough too because you could tell in that clip that Norm is like his favorite.
Oh, he certainly loves Norm. Yeah, but I thought that was a hilarious story. But yeah, Doug Stanhope, comic. I think ladies like Craig look at the hot boys, like I said, D'Elia and Dane Cook, and they get all hot and bothered by them. They're not even necessarily listening to the material. So I suggest everyone goes and listens. Use your ears, not your eyeballs, to consume Doug Stanhope.
I like Doug Stanhope. I just said he's never at like the top of my list.
He was garbage, and I disagree. So go to blindmike.net for goodness sake. And you guys let me know. Like I said, if you're a Stanhope fan, if you learned a lot, let me know. And if you think there's stuff I missed, feel free to let me know that as well. Message me on Patreon or Twitter, whatever. If you want to support the show for free, all the links are there at blindmike.net. Leave us reviews on Apple and Spotify if people are still doing that. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel. YouTube is growing every day, so let's keep that going. This is an episode you could probably watch the whole thing on YouTube, I hope. So make sure you're subscribed and tap the notification bell and all that. And tell a friend about the program. If you have anyone like that ad, we ran the ad. I think it's probably in front of this episode as well. That show Midnight Facts for Insomniacs that I was a guest on. I don't know if that's out yet or not. But I like those guys a lot. And I guess the guy said the main host, Shane, said he was just looking to get more into the history of comedy. So he just searched history of comedy and was like, oh, I guess this will do. So if there's anyone in your life that you think that might suit, tell them to just search history of comedy podcast and hopefully we come up. And if you want to support the show financially, get some bonus episodes, get these episodes a week early. I think, like I said, the next one we're doing is Make America Innate Again. So sometimes we get wacky like that on Patreon. So subscribe to that if you'd like. Join us. Also verygoodshow.org, of course. If you're more of, like I said, if you're more of a, teenage girl like Craig, they get into, They do that sort of BuzzFeed type of comedy over on Very Good Show.
What a sales pitch. Do you like Dan Cook and Chris D'Elia? Go to verygoodshow.org.
I've been meaning to mention this for a couple weeks now. People really hate the outro.
Do they?
Oh, well, some like it a lot. But here's how I look at it. It's a little treat for people who make it to the end. And if you don't like it, every time you hear it, make sure you message me and let me know that you got to the end of the episode and let me know how much you hate it so that I know enough people are hearing the end of the episode, because it's really a test to see how many of you got here. Yeah. And if I hear from enough of you and I say, all right, they're being good, they're good students, they listen to the entire history lesson, I'll give you a break. I'll get rid of the outro. But for now, it stays in, baby.
Yeah, no, that's way easier than when you go, we'll talk to you next time on Why Are You Laughing, and then stopping it. Right. That's way easier to do that. Listen to it, get angry, then message Mike that you hate
it's
it.
important that you listen. You're not allowed to shut it off. So listen to the whole thing and then message me. All right?
Do that.
No, but I appreciate everyone listening. Like I said, go to verygoodshow.org, support Craig. Go to blindmike.net to support this program. And we will talk to you guys next time on Why Are You Laughing?